Well, a pair of major upsets in the Big East has us wondering if Shaka Smart and the Marquette Golden Eagles should be considered the team to beat as we get closer and closer to Selection Sunday.
You are Locked On College Basketball, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What is up? Welcome to the Locked On College Basketball Podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I am your host, Andy Patton, and today's episode of Locked On College Basketball is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline has you covered this season with more props, more odds, and more lines than ever before. BetOnline, where the game starts. All right, I am thrilled to be joined today by Kyle Boone of CBS Sports for today's episode. Kyle, we got a lot of talk about the big men in the NCAA. We got some upsets that we're going to pick for later this weekend. Before we get into any of that stuff, though, I want to talk about what was a wild Wednesday in the Big East. DePaul upset Xavier. Seton Hall took down UConn. It's been a crazy season in that conference so far this year. And right now, after Marquette's win over Providence, the main question kind of becomes, is Shaka Smart's team, are they kind of standing alone as the team to beat in the Big East?
I think the takeaway from this week is that I think it's Xavier's probably the favorite. Now, The DePaul loss is not great, but this Xavier team has been so good and so impressive, especially on offense. Solely Boom, I think, is arguably the best and most important transfer in college basketball, and leading the team in scoring. You know, this team plays with a ton of tempo, can score it with just about anyone. You know, they won 11 straight before stumbling to DePaul, so I think I would take Xavier, but like the Big East at the top is so laughably loaded. And what's so funny to me is, like, we entered the season, it's like, it's probably Creighton. It could be Villanova, possibly UConn. And now it's like the top has been just completely turned on its head, where Xavier is a contender, Marquette is a contender. And we can talk a little bit about Marquette and what Shaka Smart has done there. But man, like, the top of the Big East is so impressive and so strong. And with teams that, like, coming into the season, they were not necessarily on the radar. And like Xavier, Marquette, Providence, like these are all, you know, teams that I think are going to be single digit seeds and like legitimate contenders to advance to the second weekend of the NCAA tournament and maybe even farther. So it's been really impressive, the top of the Big East. And I think it speaks to kind of the strength of the conference on the whole this season in college basketball. Yeah,
there was more preseason hype about some programs that haven't really been in the conversation at all. St. John's got some hype. Butler got some hype. Marquette, I think, if I'm not mistaken, was projected by most outlets to finish 9th in the Big East before the season. Now they look like a team that might end up being ranked as high as 9th in the AP poll. Obviously, depends how they do against Seton Hall on Saturday, but that's going to be an interesting matchup with Shaheen Holloway and the defense that team has. But this has been a tremendous run from Marquette. So you kind of mentioned that these teams are all sort of in that contender conversation, but I kind of want to look at them a little bit one by one, starting with Marquette. Like, 15-5 record. KenPom has them top 15. Obviously, they were not the team that got upset this past week. They got a nice victory over Ed Cooley and the Friars. I'm kind of curious, looking at what Sean Miller's team has done, Shaka Smart's team has done, kind of what this team's ceiling looks like as they get into March.
Contender. Yeah, that's all. That's my no notes. Just Marquette, maybe the best offense in college basketball this season. Really, really impressive. Probably, I think, the most underrated team. Like, everyone just kind of sleeping on Marquette because coming into the season, like, people really did not have them on the radar. I think people were really infatuated with Creighton coming into the season, and then earlier in the year when UConn is off to its hot start, people got a little distracted by UConn, and I think rightfully so. But Marquette, I think, is absolutely contender. Really high-level guard play with Cam Jones and Tyler Kolek. I think this team is legit. And you go to KenPom's page right now, projected to win the Big East Conference. That would be Marquette.
Yeah,
it's really impressive. Now, I don't think I would take them, but I mean, KenPom is a pretty solid projection website and kind of a Bible for college basketball. And so what they've done so far this season, really impressive. Obviously, they lost to Xavier over the weekend on the road, but they've won 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of their last 7. Just handled a pretty good Providence team. They beat UConn last week, so I like where they're going. Really efficient offense. Can't say enough about the turnaround that Shaka Smart has really done in half a season in Milwaukee. It's really, really impressive.
Well, you mentioned Xavier still being your favorite, so I'm going to go ahead and assume that they're probably a team that you have on the contender conversation as well. Now, this time talking about Sean Miller's team, again 15-4, top 20 in KenPom as well. Are we overly concerned about the DePaul loss, or are we thinking, hey, they rattled off 11 in a row? It's okay to have an off night.
Yeah, basically that. It's like. I love that they're facing some sort of adversity, because it feels like this team, they've had a lot of really close games, and I did kind of wonder, like, are they just like catching the right side of regression at the right time? And I'm glad that they lost. I feel like bad to say that, but they started off 7-0 in Big East play, and it's like, man, can anything go wrong for this team? And will they face some sort of adversity and finally get a little taste of it? Winning on the road is so tough in college basketball, regardless of what conference you play in. And going on the road, playing DePaul team, losing that close game, I think will rally this team in a way that is really meaningful. So I like this Xavier team. Like I mentioned earlier, Sully Boom has been just absolutely fantastic. Really like this team from top to bottom. I think this team can get hot and just about compete with anyone on a night out basis. And the fact that Sean Miller is doing this after basically being banished from Arizona under NCAA scrutiny, like it's a pretty cool story. And regardless of how you feel about Sean Miller, I'm sure there's a lot of Sean Miller haters out there, and maybe rightfully so. But what he's done this season is like a true, like, man, this guy was like out of coaching, and now he's like coaching at maybe a top 5 level right now. Like, how many programs in college basketball would want a Sean Miller? Like, right. I bet there's Louisville fans right now looking like, ooh, Sean Miller looks pretty good, right? Like, so it's been really impressive. Like the coaching in the Big East, Sean Miller, I think at the top of the Big East Coach of the Year ranks, at least at this point in the season.
You mentioned Xavier facing some adversity and how you think that might help them going forward. If that's the case, then perhaps our UConn Huskies here could benefit from the same stuff. Obviously, they just took a tough loss to Seton Hall. We've seen this team kind of scramble a little bit in the last few games after such a tremendously hot start to the season. Seton Hall is far from the worst loss you can suffer. It's far from the worst loss you can suffer even in the Big East. But I'm curious how much that game has I guess the main question is, do you think that game said more about UConn and the trajectory they're on, or more about Shaheen Holloway and Seton Hall?
I think it says more about UConn at this point, and not in a good way.
Yeah.
Unfortunately. It's a great win for Seton Hall for sure. And I think Seton Hall has got the pieces in place with Shaheen Holloway and some pieces there. Like that's going to be a really fun program to follow over the next few years. I don't think that's a team that is. I don't think it's a team that's going to make the NCAA tournament. Maybe they do, but I think it's more like this. They're heading in the right direction. Getting a win over UConn, I think, is an important step towards that. But UConn, they've lost 5 of their last 6. They started this season 14-0, 3-0 in Big East play. The defense has just like completely fallen off a cliff. I feel like. And maybe this is me being a UConn apologist to some level, because I was really in on UConn coming into the season, but I feel like they have the worst luck too. Like there's so many, like, oh my gosh, I can't believe he made that shots that they face against teams that, like, their defense has definitely fallen off, and they've allowed some big scoring from teams, from players on individual nights. But some of this is like, man, they're just catching like some of the worst breaks too. So I don't think they suddenly just can't play defense, but their defense has definitely fallen off. They've lost 5 of 6. Their pets' heads are falling off. Like Sanogo's a stud. I think Jordan Hawkins has made a huge leap, obviously, as a scorer. And then Donovan Clingan has been a guy that like has gone from completely off the radar to like maybe one of the most important freshmen in college basketball. So a lot of length, a lot of size. I'm in on UConn. I still think they're a contender, but if you're a UConn fan, the last 3 weeks have been absolutely brutal to watch. It's been really trying, but I do think they'll eventually turn things around. Now, like, let's answer this question in a couple weeks. If they lose on the road to Georgetown, I'm going to smash that panic button. They've got Butler and Xavier on deck over the next week, and then road trips at DePaul, at Georgetown. If they can go 3-1 in that stretch, and not lose to DePaul and not to Georgetown, then I think they'll be in good shape. It feels pretty brutal right now, but still very much in on the Huskies and their long-term trajectory this season.
You mentioned Sanogo. He's one of so many really, and Klingon, frankly, so many elite big men that are in college basketball this season. It was labeled as the year of the big coming into the season. It has lived up to that expectation. We're going to come back in the second segment and talk much more about that. But first, I want to tell you about today's sponsor, BetOnline. College basketball and the NBA are fully back in action. The NFL playoffs are just now getting underway, and betonline.net is your number one source for all your betting needs and sports information. From all the latest odds, contests, and player props, you name it. BetOnline remains the best spot for all the latest sports developments, including podcasts and reviews for all the leagues this season. And it's not just basketball. BetOnline is your continued source for all your sports wagering information needs, including live betting and your favorite Vegas casino games. They even have lines for coaching changes across every major sport, so even in the offseason, you can get your fix. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and action. BetOnline, where the game starts. All right, coming back here, Kyle Boone, CBS Sports, joining me here on the Locked On College Basketball podcast. Kyle, again, it was dubbed the year of the bigs. So many talented post players returning to college. There can be lengthy and have been lengthy conversations about why that is. Obviously the rise of NIL and the opportunity, really the lack of interest by NBA teams in back to the basket, low post scoring players who don't extend the defense and shoot from beyond the arc. It has created a situation where we just have this plethora of really talented back to the basket bigs. Coming into the season, the conversation was basically all around Drew Timme, Oscar Tshiebwe, Armando Bacot. Don't get me wrong, all three of those guys have been fantastic this season, but unless you have a very different opinion than me, I think it's pretty clear the National Player of the Year frontrunner is another big man that's not in that group, and that's, of course, Zach Edey at Purdue. Is that kind of where your thoughts at right now?
Yeah, I wouldn't say it's over just yet, but Zach Edey is going to start running away with it unless something significant changes here pretty quickly. Edey has been, I think, pretty clearly the best big man in college basketball, and I think pretty clearly the best player in college basketball by a reasonable amount because he's putting up massive numbers. You look at 21.9 points per game. I'm looking at this now. 13.5 rebounds per game is just insane.
Yep.
And for a Purdue team, by the way, that like was not ranked coming into the season and has risen all the way up to number 1 in the AP poll. They're number 3 right now. He's dragging a team that like is pretty good, and Matt Painter's a really good coach, but it's been the Zach Edey show. And looking through some numbers here, like highest player efficiency rating in college basketball this season at 40.2. No one else is particularly close, at least among qualifying players who have played like 10 games and over 100 minutes. So basically everyone. You have to go back to Zion Williamson at Duke to find someone who's been this comparably dominant. His PER, player efficiency rating, was 40.8, pacing as a top 3 season in that metric since 2009, 2010. That's when they first started tracking that statistic. And only Zion and Zach Edey from last year have had better player efficiency ratings in a single season. Now we'll see if Edey can keep this up. I tend to think he kind of can because he did it last season and his PER was actually higher. But he's doing it now with like a massive workload and not sharing the load with Jaden Ivey, obviously. So it's been really impressive. Edey is definitely the front runner to win National Player of the Year. I like Drew Timme quite a bit. I would put him. I think I would put him number 2 or number 3 on my list.
Mm-hmm.
If I was handicapping it right now, he's scoring more this season than he was last season. He's doing it more efficiently this season than he was last season. And oh, by the way, Gonzaga is once again a top 10 team in college basketball. They're
Right.
number 6 right now. They're totally flying under the radar.
Mm-hmm.
And they're 16-3. They had early losses to Texas, to Purdue, to Baylor, and I think it threw people off the scent of Gonzaga just a little bit. But Gonzaga's clearly a top 10 team. Timme has been totally dominant, and I think is a very sneaky candidate to win National Player of the Year. Now he's 2 or 3 on my list, so maybe he's not so sneaky, but people have been very taken by Zach Edey, and I'm just here to say, don't sleep on Drew Timme just yet.
I think it's interesting to kind of look at the comparison between Edey and Timme in some ways. I think a significant part, both players saw their team lose significant talent from last year's roster, this year's team. Obviously, Zach Edey loses Jaden Ivey. Drew Timme loses Chet Holmgren and Andrew Nembhard, 2 significant losses. And to see kind of how those players have responded, Edey's really had to take on a significant load. But one thing that has really helped Purdue is the performance of some of their young guards. Foster Loyer has been fantastic. Smith has been fantastic. Like they've had and that's a huge credit to Matt Painter and his ability to find talent that is not necessarily in the 24/7 top 25 or 50 or even 100 for some of these guys. And so for their ability to find that talent has been significant. But I wonder too, like how much Edey taking on such a bigger role. Like Drew Timme's put up consistent numbers for years, and they're better this year. And you're absolutely right about that. But I wonder how much like fatigue plays a kind of a role in how people perceive these players. Of like Tshiebwe and Bacot are basically putting up similar numbers to what they've done in the past. Drew Timme slightly improved, whereas Edey's numbers, in part because of how much his minutes have gone up and how much his usage rate has gone up, his numbers have exploded. Now I'm with you. Zach Edey is right now, he dropped the season right now. He's my player of the year, but I do wonder how much like almost fatigue about certain players for how long they've been in college, how productive they've been for multiple years. If you think that almost like hurts certain players' candidacies.
I think so. I think it does because, it's like, it's almost like the rarity of MVPs winning back to back. Like it happens actually like fairly frequently, but I think people just get tired of talking about the same player every year, and there's just like a little bit of like voter fatigue, and I think that trickles out into like the general public too. So like I'm shocked that there's not more Drew Timme buzz, just because yes, Zach Edey's like he's been awesome. He's definitely been the best player in college basketball, but like Timme's like right there. And I think it's just because like he's been in college basketball forever. People will look up and be like, man, Gonzaga, like this is a team that doesn't perform in March. And it's like the typical Gonzaga narrative that like it's just totally bunk and bogus. They're like consistently a top 5 team in America. Like they're advancing deep in the NCAA tournament every year. They just haven't won the national championship. Like that's literally it. And I think that kind of rubs off onto people and onto the perception of Drew Timme. But so yeah, like I think there's a lot of factors beyond just like how players are performing on the court that go into kind of the perception of how we view the player of the year candidates. And it's interesting. So I think that probably is affecting maybe Oscar Tshiebwe a little bit too. And Tshiebwe has the fact that like Kentucky's they're underperforming by a significant margin. So I think that hurts his candidacy too.
Without a doubt. People have been tired of Drew Timme since he was a sophomore. Like people have been tired of him for a really, really long time.
He's the most he's maybe the most likable player in college basketball. Like the best interview, the best quote. He keeps it totally real. Like shout out Drew Timme. He's a fantastic college basketball personality. I'm glad that we have players like this coming back because like he is the perfect example of what NIL can do to change college basketball for the better. Now we'll see if college football will benefit in the same ways. Like, but college basketball, like players like him coming back, having some familiarity with players year in and year out has been like one of the biggest complaints since I've been covering college basketball. Is like the best players, they go to Kentucky, they go to Duke, they go to Kansas, and then they go to the NBA. They literally stay one season and then they go. And having guys back, having familiar guys back, even if they're not the most popular players, I think is really important. And the fact that Timme is like a very familiar face. He's got the big mustache. He's got the mustache celebration. He's on a Gonzaga team that's always relevant, like, and is very likable on top of that. Like, I think it's all good and gravy for college basketball.
And likable in a way where, like, he knows he's disliked. Like, I think that's a key part of who Drew Timme is he knows that, like, when they played BYU a few days ago, like, the Marriott Center was packed. It was an incredible road crowd, the most intense road environment Gonzaga's played in a really long time. And they were there for Drew Timme. Like, people were there to yell at Drew Timme, and he knew it. And he had an okay game. He didn't play great, but he kind of hammed it up. And like that character, to have that in college basketball, even if everybody's complaining about him, even if people are tired of him, even if the narrative is, oh, he's in his 9th year, he's in his 12th year, he's like 35 years old or whatever. That's great. It's great because he does not mind being hated. He does not mind being that guy that everybody points to. And I think that you need more villains. And I think Drew Timme kind of fills that role admirably right now.
Yeah, and good luck hating Drew Timme, by the way. Like, it's probably easy to do if, like, your team is playing against him, but, like, the most likable villain that we've had in college basketball in a long time.
Absolutely. Well, Kyle and I here are going to close out the show picking some potential upsets in what looks like another outstanding slate of college hoops basketball this weekend. Before we do that, though, a word from today's sponsor, Built Bar. If you're looking for a delicious treat but don't want all the fat and calories, then you've got to try a Built Bar. We just got through the holidays, and I know my goal is to eat a little bit healthier this year. If you like me, where you want to eat healthier but you don't want to compromise taste, then man, I've got just the thing for you. You've got to try Built Bars. With Built, healthy is actually tasty. Seriously, they're so delicious you won't want to put them down, and you will not think that they are good for you. They are perfect for your New Year's resolution. What makes Built Bars so good? Well, for starters, they're covered in 100% real chocolate. That's right, real chocolate. And they come in unbelievable flavors like churro, peanut butter brownie, coconut almond. I'm not sure how Built does it, but these bars taste like a candy bar while maintaining amazing macros. They have only 130 calories, 4 grams of sugar with 17 grams of protein. And now you don't have to wait around to get a box. For years, we've been talking about ordering your Built Bars at Built.com. Now you can get them at your local Walmart or Sam's Club. That's right. Head to your nearest Walmart today, walk up to the pharmacy section, and grab yourself a box of Built Bars. All right, segment 3 here. Still Andy Patton, still locked on college basketball, still chatting here with Kyle Boone of CBS. Kyle, I want to talk about some potential upsets that could happen this weekend. My co-host Isaac Shade and I were realizing that we should have probably started documenting our upset watch predictions earlier in the season, because quite a few of them have ended up coming together. So for folks who are out there interested in, hey, what are some of the games where we might actually see a ranked team or a team that's perceived as being better end up losing, this is the place to go to check out that segment. First game here that I want to talk about here with you, Kyle, is Wake Forest versus Virginia. And this is a tough one. You want to pick upsets that are likely going to happen, but you also don't want to pick upsets that are going to make you look silly. And I was a little worried about this one because Virginia can really put the clamps on people. But looking at the numbers here, Wake Forest is 10-0 at home. They do not lose on their home court. They have been very, very good there. Virginia's 3-2 on the road. Wake is a very, very good offensive team, 32nd in adjusted offense at KenPom. Of course, Virginia is an outstanding defensive team and continues to not get enough credit for how good they are on the offensive end of the floor as well. That's going to be the big key in this game. Virginia is a good offensive team. Wake is not a good defensive team, but they are a team that shoots the crap out of the basketball from deep. They're just under 38% as a team. At home, good three-point shooting team, slightly inconsistent Virginia team. I'm going to call the upset here and say Wake Forest might be able to pull this one out.
I like it. I think this is a good pick. And the three-point numbers, I think, probably bear that out. Like, if Wake can shoot around what it is shooting on the season, this is a matchup that I think Wake Forest can win. They've obviously been very good at home this season. Virginia's three-point defense is like among the worst in the ACC. So I think I will take Virginia in this matchup. I will swerve as you pick the upset, but I do think it'll be a really close game. And if you're looking for like an underdog to back on the slate on Saturday, you could do worse than riding with Steve Forbes' club. Like, that's a really good team, and people probably not talking about that because the ACC is a little bit down. But that Demon Deacons team is really good, and they're coming along at a nice pace here.
Yeah, absolutely. Next game here that I want to talk about was Oklahoma over Baylor. That's another one that Big 12 is just messy this year. Every single team in the Big 12 is so good. Oklahoma is one of the quote unquote worst teams in the Big 12. Ken Pom has them 38th right now, 34th offensively, 58th defensively. So still a solid team. And I kind of think Oklahoma is due. They've got 1 point loss to Texas, 3 point loss to Iowa State, 4 point loss to Kansas. Those are all extremely good teams. I think the lowest ranked team out of that group was Iowa State, and I think they were 21st when Oklahoma played them. All of those games basically came down to the final few possessions. Baylor has been on a hot streak lately, but they've had a pretty inconsistent year. Obviously, they got waxed by Marquette earlier in the year, had a 3-game losing streak in the Big 12, which again is nothing to really sneeze at because you can lose 3 games in the Big 12 and all be top 10, top 5 caliber teams. But I think there's a chance here for Grant Sherfield, for the Groves brothers at Oklahoma to do enough damage, especially against Baylor's somewhat inconsistent front court, and potentially kind of pull themselves a victory here. Keontae George has been incredible for the Bears over the last couple of weeks. And if he comes out and plays like the potential freshman of the year candidate or the non-Brandon Miller freshman of the year candidate that he is, then perhaps I think Baylor's got a good chance. But something in me tells me Oklahoma's due, and they might be able to pull this one out.
Love this call. Love the shout out for Keontae George. He's been fantastic. He had 26 points against Texas Tech earlier in the week. I was in on potentially Texas Tech taking down Baylor, and I looked totally foolish. And guess what? I'm back on it. I'm back on it. I think OU as the upset pick. I'm going to ride with you here. I like OU in this matchup. They've been pretty good at home this season. Obviously, I had a couple tough, close losses in Norman, but coming off a really disappointing showing in the Bedlam series on Wednesday, where Oklahoma State just kind of waxed them. Like it wasn't really close, and at the end there, like they just kind of ran away with it. So this is an OU team that plays with a lot of pride under Porter Mosier. I think they will come out kind of pissed off at how they performed in the Bedlam game, and against this Baylor team, like yes, they've been hot. They've won 3 straight, but those wins at West Virginia, over Oklahoma State, and at Texas Tech, 3 teams that honestly they've not been super great this season. Baylor on the whole has been kind of disappointing. And I think probably people are off of Baylor a little bit because of, I think people will be on Baylor, because they've won 3 straight, but I think you have to keep it in context, like the whole and the totality of their season, which I think has been relative to expectations. It's been a little bit disappointing. So, I'm in on that too. I will Boomer Sooner with you on Saturday.
Love it. Kyle, thank you so much for taking time to come onto the show. Help us preview this weekend, talk about all the great bigs in the league, talk a little bit about the Big East. It's always fun to have your expertise and your insight onto the show. So I appreciate you taking the time.
Hey, I'm glad to be here, Andy, and shout out to Isaac for you guys continuing to bring me on this podcast for no apparent reason whatsoever. I'm always very long-winded, so I appreciate you hanging with me. And if you're I'm going to make one last pick, by the way. I did make 2. I'm going to make one last pick before I bounce. Miami over Duke on Saturday in Cameron. After road loss to Clemson, I think people will be expecting a Duke comeback. Probably no Jeremy Roach in this one for Duke. Miami's got really good guard play. That will be my sayonara upset pick for Saturday. So, but yeah, appreciate you having me on, and we'll have to do this again.
Absolutely. Well, that is going to do it for us today. Always fun to end the show talking about Duke and the Blue Devils. So, Kyle, thank you again. For those of you listening, you can find Locked On College Basketball wherever you get your podcasts. Go subscribe to us on YouTube if you haven't done so yet. Search Locked On College Basketball. Hit that big red subscribe button. Fantastic weekend of games coming up. We're excited to get a chance to break it down with you all on Monday. For now, peace out.